people didn't get divorced as much as they do now. And it was, the stigma often was on the woman. I think those are real concerns, that he would be with someone who would make his life difficult for him.
The cameras were rolling, millions were watching, and Meryl Streep was about to drop a bombshell that would change everything we thought we knew about Hollywood's most respected marriage. You guys, I'm still processing what happened that night at the Golden Globes, because when Meryl stood up to accept her Lifetime Achievement Award, nobody expected her to turn the spotlight on the one person who's been by her side for decades. And what she said about her husband Don wasn't just shocking, it was absolutely terrifying in the most unexpected way. Picture this. There she is, America's acting goddess, holding that golden statue, and instead of the usual thank you speech we've heard a million times before, she looks directly into the camera and says something that made everyone in that room go completely silent. The producers were probably having heart attacks, the cameras kept rolling, and Don Gummer, this super private sculptor who's managed to stay out of the spotlight for their entire 45-year marriage, suddenly became the center of the most talked about moment of the night. But here's the thing that's been eating at me ever since. What Meryl revealed wasn't just personal, it was something so raw and honest about marriage, about sacrifice, and about the price of fame that it left everyone speechless. Because when you peel back the layers of what she actually said, it's not just about her and Don. It's about every Hollywood marriage that looks perfect from the outside, but is actually held together by secrets, compromises, and things we never talk about. And honestly, when you really think about what marriage means, when one person is literally the most famous actress in the world, and the other person has spent decades deliberately avoiding cameras, what she exposed was terrifying because it was so brutally real. Like, this wasn't some celebrity scandal or drama. This was Meryl Streep basically admitting that even the most perfect-looking Hollywood marriage comes with a darkness that most of us can't even imagine. So let me take you back to the beginning, because to understand why this moment was so shocking, you need to understand just how carefully Meryl and Don have protected their privacy for almost 5 decades. And trust me, what I discovered about their relationship is going to make you see that Golden Globe speech in a completely different light. When Meryl Streep married Don Gummer in 1978, just 6 months after the tragic death of her boyfriend John Cazale, Hollywood was a different place. She was this rising star, fresh off The Deer Hunter, and he was this quiet, serious sculptor from Indiana who had absolutely no interest in the entertainment industry. And you know what? That's exactly what made their relationship work for so long. Don Gummer isn't just some Hollywood husband riding on his wife's coattails. This man is a legitimate artist in his own right, a sculptor whose work has been displayed in major museums across the country. But here's what's fascinating. While Meryl was becoming the most celebrated actress of her generation, Don was deliberately building a career that kept him as far away from cameras and red carpets as possible. It's like he made a conscious decision to be the anti-Hollywood spouse. For decades, their marriage was held up as this perfect example of how to make it work in an industry that destroys relationships. They had 4 kids together, Henry, Mamie, Grace, and Louisa, and somehow managed to keep their family life completely separate from Meryl's insane career. Don would show up to maybe 1 or 2 premieres a year, always looking slightly uncomfortable in his tuxedo, and then disappear back to his studio where he could work with clay and metal instead of dealing with paparazzi and entertainment reporters. But what most people don't realize is just how much sacrifice this arrangement required, especially from Don. Think about it. Your wife is literally traveling the world, working with the most famous directors and actors on the planet, getting nominated for Oscars every other year, and you're at home with the kids, supporting her career while your own artistic work gets almost no recognition because nobody wants to interview the sculptor married to Meryl Streep. And here's where it gets really interesting, because as their kids grew up and started having their own careers, Mamie and Grace both became actresses, Henry became a musician, and Louisa went into fashion. The family dynamics started shifting in ways that nobody outside their inner circle really understood. Suddenly, it wasn't just Meryl who was famous. The whole family was becoming part of Hollywood royalty, and Don was still this quiet guy who just wanted to make art and stay out of the spotlight. The cracks in their perfect image started showing up in the most subtle ways. If you go back and watch Meryl's acceptance speeches over the years, you'll notice something interesting. In the early years, she always thanked Don first, talked about how he was her rock, how she couldn't do any of it without him. But somewhere around 2010, those mentions started getting shorter, more perfunctory, like she was checking a box instead of speaking from the heart. And then there were the red carpet appearances. Don went from being Meryl's regular +1 to showing up maybe once a year, and when he did appear, the body language was different. He'd stand slightly behind her, never quite touching, always looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. The entertainment media started calling him the reluctant husband and making jokes about how he was the only person in Hollywood who seemed immune to fame. But what nobody was talking about was what this dynamic was doing to their actual relationship. Because when one person in a marriage is literally worshipped by millions of people and the other person is intentionally invisible, that creates a power imbalance that would be difficult for any couple to navigate. And Meryl, being Meryl, was carrying all of this pressure to maintain the image of the perfect Hollywood marriage while dealing with whatever was really going on behind closed doors. The first real crack in their public facade came in 2019, when Don missed the Academy Awards for the first time in over a decade. Meryl went alone, and when reporters asked about his absence, her publicist gave some generic excuse about scheduling conflicts. But people who know the family started whispering that things at home weren't as perfect as they seemed. And then came 2023, and everything changed. Meryl and Don quietly separated after 45 years of marriage, but they managed to keep it so private that most people still don't even know it happened. They didn't file for divorce, didn't make any public statements, just quietly started living separate lives. Don moved to Connecticut full-time. Meryl kept a New York apartment, and suddenly, this couple that everyone thought was unbreakable had basically ended their marriage without anyone noticing. But here's what makes this whole situation so much more complex than a typical Hollywood divorce. Meryl and Don didn't separate because of some dramatic scandal or betrayal. They separated because after 45 years of marriage, they had basically become completely different people living completely different lives, and the only thing keeping them together was the public expectation that they should stay together. Think about it. Meryl at 74 is still working constantly, still getting offered the best roles in Hollywood, still traveling around the world for premieres and film festivals. She's energized by her career, by being around other creative people, by the constant stimulation of new projects and challenges. Meanwhile, Don, at 76, has spent decades being Meryl Streep's husband, when all he ever wanted was to be known for his own art. And this is where that Golden Globes moment becomes so much more meaningful, because what Meryl was really doing when she exposed her husband wasn't revealing some dark secret. She was finally acknowledging the impossible situation they'd been living in for decades. She was admitting that even the most perfect-looking Hollywood marriage requires sacrifices that most people would find unacceptable. When she stood up there and talked about Don, she wasn't just thanking him for supporting her career. She was apologizing for what their marriage had become and acknowledging that staying together at this point would be more about maintaining an image than actually being happy. And that's what made it so terrifying, not because it was scandalous, but because it was so honest about the reality of fame and marriage that most people don't want to face. The thing that's been bothering me ever since I really started digging into this story is how much pressure Meryl has been under to maintain this perfect image. Like, she's not just an actress, she's become this symbol of everything that's good about Hollywood. She's the serious artist who never sold out, the devoted mother who raised successful kids, the loyal wife who stayed married to the same man for decades in an industry where marriages last about as long as promotional tours. But what happens when that perfect image starts to crack? What happens when you realize that even Meryl Streep, the most respected actress in the world, couldn't figure out how to balance a career and a marriage without somebody having to sacrifice who they are? And what does it say about the rest of us if someone with unlimited resources and opportunities still couldn't make it work? Because that's what's really terrifying about what Meryl exposed. Not that her marriage fell apart, but that it fell apart despite both of them being good people who genuinely loved each other. There was no villain in this story, no betrayal, no drama. Just two people who spent so long trying to be what everyone else needed them to be that they forgot how to be what each other needed. And now, as Meryl continues working and Don focuses on his art, they're both finally free to be themselves for the first time in decades. But it came at the cost of a marriage that everyone thought was unbreakable, and it happened so quietly that most people still think they're together. The aftermath of their separation has been fascinating to watch because both of them seem happier now than they have in years. Meryl's recent performances have had this energy and authenticity that was maybe missing for a while, like she's finally free to take risks without worrying about how it might affect anyone else. And Don's art has gotten more attention in the past 2 years than it had in the previous decade, probably because he's no longer defined solely as Meryl Streep's husband. But what this whole situation reveals about Hollywood marriages is pretty devastating. Because if Meryl Streep and Don Gummer, two of the most grounded and private people in the entertainment industry, couldn't make it work long term, what does that say about everyone else? What does it say about the impossible pressures that fame puts on relationships, and the way that success in Hollywood often requires sacrifices that destroy the very things that made success meaningful in the first place? And honestly, that's what made that Golden Globe speech so powerful and so terrifying. Not because Meryl was revealing some scandal, but because she was finally being honest about the cost of the career that everyone envies. She was admitting that you can't have everything, that every choice comes with a price, and that sometimes the price of being Meryl Streep is too high for the people you love most. So when people talk about that speech being shocking or controversial, they're missing the point. What was shocking wasn't what she said about Don, it was her willingness to finally tell the truth about what it really costs to be successful in Hollywood. And what's terrifying is realizing that if someone as smart and grounded as Meryl Streep couldn't figure out how to have both a legendary career and a lasting marriage, maybe the problem isn't with individual people, maybe it's with the system itself. The whole thing makes you wonder about all those other Hollywood couples who seem to have it figured out. Are they actually happy? Or are they just better at hiding the compromises and sacrifices that keeping up appearances requires? And when we put celebrities on pedestals and expect them to be perfect at everything, career, marriage, parenting, aging gracefully, are we setting them up for the kind of impossible standards that ultimately destroyed what Meryl and Don had? Because at the end of the day, that's what Meryl exposed when she talked about her husband on live TV. Not some dark secret, but the brutal honesty that even the most perfect-looking life comes with choices that most of us couldn't imagine making. And maybe that's the most terrifying thing of all. What do you think about all of this? Are we putting too much pressure on celebrities to be perfect at everything? Or is this just the price of fame? Let me know in the comments what you make of Meryl's separation and whether you think she made the right choice in finally being honest about what her career has cost her family. And if you want to see more about Hollywood marriages that aren't what they seem, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because I've got some stories that are going to blow your mind.